Welcome to a new episode of Film Seizure at the Movies. I'm Geoff Arbuckle, co-host of the Film Seizure podcast that you can catch each Wednesday morning with my cohorts Jason Oliver and Chuck Moore, as well as my solo show Monster Mondays each Monday afternoon. You can catch both of those shows at filmseizure.com. This time around, I scare up some good old nostalgia from the 80s and ask the question, who are you going to call? Well, the answer is me, because I want to review the new Ghostbusters Afterlife film from Jason Reitman, son of original Ghostbusters director and producer Ivan Reitman. Gosh, Ghostbusters, huh? Well, is it possible to even mutter the title without potentially getting a bunch of whiny fanboys going on and on about comparing it to the 2016 version and 1984, and I don't know. I have a generally good relationship with the Ghostbusters franchise, but not in the ways that you might think. I'm not really a super fan. I love the 1984 original. I have lots of issues with the 1989 sequel, and I have a complicated relationship with the 2016 movie. While I love the original film and, to this day, quite enjoy every single moment of it, I can't say that it's a movie that has translated into much more than a bunch of enjoyment watching it each time that I've seen it since. I don't have a great many collectibles that are Ghostbusters related. I don't really play any video games or read comics or even really watch the cartoon. So it's always been a situation of, yeah, it's great, but, and that but would always reveal that I was way more into Gremlins and the Star Trek films of that time. And I was excited for the 1989 sequel, but it disappointed me quite a bit. So much so that I only watched it the other night after not seeing it for probably 20 years or so. I see good things in the movie, but it's a lot of poor execution and a lot of contrivances. Now, while the 2016 version is just not a movie that works all that well for me, it does for a few, but it's ultimately kind of largely forgettable. So going back to the well, which is a total pun if you watch this latest version and check out the scenes around this abandoned mine, well, it made me really think about what I wanted in a Ghostbusters movie. The original was, yes, first a comedy, but then had a little bit of adventure and heavy doses of horror and maybe a little bit of science fiction too. It didn't care to explain itself and how some of those horror and sci-fi elements worked, but it didn't really matter either. The four main Ghostbusters and a few of the side characters really spoke for themselves and the movie, and some of the very best humor in it was fairly deadpan and was just kind of people reacting to things more than anything. Obviously, I want more of that everyday person having to deal with all the lunacy of a ghost apocalypse. So keep that, absolutely. What I don't want, and what the 2016 version did way too much of, was unscripted shtick. Take that out. We don't need it. I also don't want a one-to-one updated analog for each of the original characters. We don't need that either. Now, this movie had another element that was very apparent in the trailers, and that was drama. It was clear there would be a family story that branches off from the Harold Ramis character of Egon Spengler. I liked what I was seeing in the trailers because, well, it wanted you to know that A, this was not going to try to beat you over the head with comedy, and B, it wanted to be as respectful as possible. And if it's all balanced properly, I thought this could really be a pretty good movie that worked really, really well. And so let's talk about whether or not it did work. And I would say that it works at about a clip of about 90%, and maybe a little bit more than 90%. This is a very well-made movie, and it really feels like it really truly is a sequel to the 1984 Ghostbusters film. So much so, in fact, I think it more or less ignores all of the second film altogether. But let's talk briefly about that 10% that didn't really quite work. There are two elements that really make up the things that really didn't work for me, or at least started to kind of wear me down a little bit. First up, while this movie is exceptionally funny in its own right, there were some one-liners that really didn't work. In fact, there are a couple of lines that are so bad they stick out to me and will be something that I'll probably have stuck in my brain for, I don't know, probably years. One is bad use of that whole tagline of the original film, "Who are you going to call?" I did it so much better just a few minutes ago than the movie did, and I probably still sucked at it and really kind of forced that line too. The second is a line that immediately dated this movie and won't work at all in 5 years' time. Please, Hollywood, let's not use the word woke in jokes anymore if you want your movie to be watchable in the future. The larger issue, though, is most of the third act. It doesn't quite do enough to make us feel like this is truly a new take or a new idea on the Ghostbusters franchise. This is a minor spoiler because, let's face it, it's been pretty clear that this element is in the movie based on the previews and ads and such, but here goes. It's getting pretty obvious to me that this franchise has a gozer problem. It can't seem to shake the she-beast or whatever the hell she is. She's neither man nor woman, which is pretty woke for 2000 BC. That's a terrible joke. I wish that joke didn't make the final cut of this movie. Anyway, maybe if it was explained that yes, Ghostbusters 2 didn't happen and the Ghostbusters stopped that one major threat that was causing all the ghost problems to begin with, and then poof, nothing more happened. But it was only a temporary fix. Okay, but even then, it's not really a great way to do your sequel. You really should have something that makes Gozer look like super small potatoes in comparison. Now, what that ultimately does is place us right back into all too familiar trappings. like a ghost trap. If you've seen the first movie, there's nothing new for us to be surprised by. It starts hitting the same beats, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the more fan service type stuff here in just a bit. But all of that said, the first two acts in particular are incredibly engaging and engrossing. This is almost entirely thanks to McKenna Grace as Phoebe, the nerdy granddaughter of Egon. She absolutely carries this film. When she's on screen, you care about what she's doing, what she's thinking about, and how she's getting by as this kind of fish out of water, except for the fact that there seems to be no water anywhere to be found. It's so easy to see that she could be related to the Ramis character in the way that she talks, carries herself, and even, frankly, down to how poorly she tells a joke. There's just this awkwardness to her that's just really great. Now, McKenna Grace is really something special, and I think she'll be a big star in taking on some really great roles probably pretty soon. I would even say that she is so good in this that almost all that I like about this movie really is thanks to her and connects to her. And that's not to say that Finn Wolfhard, who plays her older brother Trevor, isn't good. But honestly, when watching the trailer, you thought he'd be the one carrying the movie, while Grace's Phoebe is just coming up with gadgets or the smart stuff. No, the smart person isn't just a little girl, but is the hero of the damn movie and frankly the whole world. Carrie Coon, who plays the kid's mother, is good too, but her best scenes really are with Grace and the scene in which she goes on a date with Paul Rudd's Gary and is worried about Phoebe not developing into a normal, happy person, whatever that might mean for someone. There's a lot of heart here, particularly with these three characters that are struggling to make it by and kind of already shattered by decisions that were made by Egon. And add to that Paul Rudd, who's always welcome as kind of this sort of not cool scientist guy who teaches summer school and just shows kids VHS tapes of 80s horror movies. And you've really got a solid cast. And I don't think there's honestly much to say about Rudd that you can't say about him in most roles he gets. He definitely brings an everyman kind of sensibility. He's just fun and you really can't help but to like him. But let's talk about the nostalgia of this movie. In a lot of ways, this does really look and feel like an 80s movie. And I can sum up the overall feeling I have for this movie in one way. It's front to back, top to bottom, an 80s sequel. In fact, it's an even better 80s sequel than the 1984 Ghostbusters' own 80s sequel. Now, with that, there are some of the trappings of the sequel stuff. It, at times, wants you to really see things that mean something from the original movie. Other times, it's a little more subtle, but they're still there if you catch it. That also means that it will fall into those familiar and safe repetitive beats, and that's where my main issues come in. But there's one more thing. And I won't give away the biggest spoilers, but the climax is something that will make or break the movie for you. It's something that was a little hard for me at first because of the structure of the story would tell me that it would be a pretty cheap cop-out if it goes the direction that it did. But as that scene continued, it started to make more sense. And by the end, it's maybe a bit much for some in terms of the emotional element of it, but it actually kind of worked and started working for me with a caveat. And I'll just say that I would like for this to maybe be the last Ghostbusters film. There's really no need to really do anything more here. It's obviously been difficult to strike the same appreciation the first movie has with the general public. Maybe that's simply what makes the original film that much more special, because maybe it shouldn't have worked at all, and it ended up doing it. As for the fans, I think mostly they will be happier this time around. There will be some who will go straight for the snark and rip on this movie for the very same nostalgia that they themselves craved, but at least for me, it was a little bit more of a warm blanket that I was glad was treated with appreciation and heart. It's maybe more of a movie simply for the fans. There are problems in the movie that I can go into much more detail if I was able to give spoilers. And there are things that, again, spoilers prevent me from wanting to explain how I felt about them. And there were things that I really liked and felt worked really, really well. And that was just for me on a personal level. And I don't know if I could really ask for anything better. And to be honest with you, I don't think I should have to defend that either. Now, don't forget to follow Film Seizure on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram so you can be made aware of new episodes of our various shows as they drop. You can also follow us at podcast providers like SoundCloud, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spotify, and Audible. You can also listen to the show on YouTube by subscribing there. And as we hit the start of 2022, Monster Mondays will be found on YouTube, so be sure you're subscribed there so you can watch the revamped and relaunched version of that show. I'll be back with the next review in a few weeks with the highly anticipated Guillermo del Toro thriller, Nightmare Alley. So until then, don't forget to save me the aisle seat.